Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Matthew Flanigan, and today I'm going to be reviewing Rome Total War 2 for the Wargamer.com. Rome Total War 2 is the 8th edition in the Total War series. Well, technically the 9th if you want to include Total War Battles, but given that game is very different and was released primarily for mobile devices, we'll consider it the 8th in the Total War family. Rome Total War 2 recycles a lot of gameplay elements and features from previous Total War games. I do not intend to go over each and every one of those. Rather, in this review I will focus mainly on newer gameplay elements that are included in Rome Total War 2. If you're completely unfamiliar with the Total War series, it may be best for you to go back and look at a few reviews of previous games to get an understanding of the game, and then come back and watch this video for an assessment of the newest edition in the Total War series. As with previous iterations of the Total War series, Rome Total War 2's gameplay can be broken down into two main parts. The first part of the game would be the strategic campaign. This part of the game unfolds across the strategic campaign map. The strategic map covers from the furthest western reaches of Europe along the Moroccan and Spanish coastlines, all the way to the Near East and parts of Persia and present-day Iran. The map is broken down into 57 different provinces, which can be further subdivided into 157 different regions, each region possessing one city. The terrain faithfully recreates the covered areas, from the deserts of Persia to the mountains of the Alps to the plains of Gaul. But on the whole, the campaign map really doesn't have much new to offer, and is just another recreation of previous versions of the Total War series. There's nothing wrong with that, just suffice to say there really haven't been any improvements made in this area either. While there isn't a whole lot new to offer on the map, it is where the heart of the game lies in my mind. Some people might be more interested in the 3D battles, which we'll touch on later, but really, given the city management style of the Total War series and the poor battle AI, this is probably the most difficult and challenging part of the game, that is, managing your cities and your resources. As I've already said, every province has its city, which you need to build up into a profitable center which will allow you to build your empire and build your armies and propel you to further successes. This can be a very challenging goal, and it can be made more challenging by the user interface, which really doesn't seem to map out your buildings all that well. It seems that all of your buildings and your units are just kind of listed in sort of a poorly thought out manner. This is one of those things I'd really give it to the early Total War games, where it seemed like it was always clear when you were building something what that would allow you to build in the future. Whereas in this game, it doesn't really seem the user interface does a great job of explaining the building tree. Sure, you can find that type of stuff out if you want to look through the encyclopedia of the game, which is very vast and is a very useful companion, but it just doesn't seem the user interface has a whole lot of space for helping you plan out your city building. That goes for army building as well, which is a little bit frustrating to me. Still, on the whole, the user interface here in building cities and armies is adequate, just not as neat as previous versions of the Total War series. Other than that, I don't really have a whole lot to add with regards to the strategic map. It's worth noting that armies are built on the strategic map in cities and provinces, and then they move around the map as you attempt to expand your empire and your influence. You need to find a healthy balance in terms of building up revenue but also keeping public order in line, but really none of that is anything new. One feature in the gameplay that I really did enjoy is the ability to add a sort of a history for units. So what I mean by that is if you have an army and it's destroyed, you can actually raise a new army and give it the same designation as the destroyed army. So for example, if you're fighting a battle with the First Legion's destroyed, and then you go and raise a new army, you can name that army the First Legion. And if you do that, your new legion will maintain all the characteristics of the original legion. So army units can gain different traits, which kind of give units their own sort of feel, their own sort of history. It's almost like the history which follows famous units in the more modern times, like the 101st Airborne. And that's kind of a neat little feature to have. It helps build a little bit of a story behind your game. As with previous versions of the game, when two armies or two fleets collide, you're given the choice to fight a battle. You can either resolve the battle automatically, fight it yourself, withdraw, or if you're in a siege, you have some other options which are presented as well. That brings us to the biggest edition of the campaign game, When two fleets collide, you used to only have the option to automatically resolve the battles or withdraw. Now you're actually given the option to fight the battles out manually. Just like on land battles, when a naval engagement occurs, a 3D map or 3D battlefield is generated and you're brought to the point of the fight. Here you can see fleets are laid out just as army units are, where you can deploy your troops prior to the engagement and set up your overall positions. Now, I don't find a whole lot different about naval combat in this compared to land combat. I will say that I do think it's a perfect era to simulate naval combat, because there are very few games out there which simulate naval combat in this era. There's probably few games out there that simulate naval combat at all, but the ancient era seems to be very sorely missed. There's definitely a good variety in units and different types of ships, different pluses and minuses to different types of ships, smaller, more maneuverable ships, bigger, heavier ships designed for ramming. Combat seems to follow the appropriate method, if you will, for this era, with troops, boarding each other's ships, fighting basically land battles when the two ships collide, ranged weapons, things like Greek fire or breams, which fire off flame and can burn other ships. You ram a smaller ship with a bigger one, and there's a pretty good chance of it just sinking altogether, but sometimes you can damage your own ship in ramming. So there's a lot of different strategies or tactics which you can use to try and win naval battles. What I will say is that the game's battles do suffer from the same mechanical faults of the regular Total War series, that being micromanagement. If you enjoy micromanagement of battles, this is a great game for you, but one of the things that the game struggles with is naval engagements. When you have 20 ships or so and you're trying to engage an enemy, it seems your ships really don't do anything on their own. So you have to manually click around and tell them what ships to attack and what ships you want them to go after. Now, ranged units will fire at enemy units that are in range on their own, so there is that positive element. But really, if you want to fight a naval battle out, it just seems there's too much pointing and clicking going on in a very short period of time. Overall, the battles are beautiful and very interesting, and it's a very nice new feature. It's been a long time coming, and I really applaud the Total War series for finally trying to tackle naval battles. But I think they suffer from the same sort of elements that the land battles suffer from, and that is, while they are gorgeous, there really just isn't enough, there aren't enough options going on here for you to be able to fight these battles without feeling like you have to run around clicking every which way and playing the command of every single ship or every single regiment. I understand it's not a real-time tactical game like Sid Meier or the Take Command or Scourge of War series, but with that said, it definitely would benefit the game to have more options as far as commanding units, as opposed to having to click and tell them where to go. Maybe that's something that will change in some of the patches. The game has been releasing weekly patches to iron out certain issues and improve the AI, so hopefully that's something that will maybe come in an update or a downloadable content at some point in the future. Land battles suffer from many of the same shortcomings that the sea battles suffer from as well. Armies can be as large as 20 units, which means you can have battles of around 2,400 men, which are individually modeled on the battlefield, and as I've already said numerous times, the game is absolutely beautiful in its depiction of these battles. However, these units really do become cumbersome to manage, and using tactics of any sort is fairly difficult when you're on the offensive. It's easier when you're on the defensive and you don't have to move as many units around, but on the offensive it just seems like you're always clicking and always running from one corner to the other, and you really have difficulty implementing any sort of tactical doctrine when you have to command the units on every single portion of the field without being able to maybe just click one and select 4 units. The issue that I have here is that when you can select multiple units at once, just like in sea battles. However, if you want to give them a target, you can only target one enemy unit. So rather than having each unit attack a unit to its front, you end up clicking on one enemy unit, telling them to attack, and they all converge on that one unit, and you kind of have a mob battle result where there seems to be no element of tactics, and instead it just devolves into a mob fight. Now, this might be a great time period to model that type of fighting, because there was a lot less tactical adjustments which could be made here than perhaps in the Napoleonic period. There's some of the previous games in here, but it does just feel a little bit too out of control, if you will, where it's just mob on mob and there really doesn't seem to be any form of military tactics which occur here. The issue is compounded by the fact that now when you have multiple armies fighting, you can actually have those reinforcements appear instantly. So in previous versions, before Shogun 2, if two armies would fight, or if you brought in reinforcements, so you had two of your own armies in a battle, what would happen is you were maxed out at the 20 unit limit of a single army, and the second army wouldn't be able to bring any reinforcements on until one of your units from your first army was driven off the field. So it would kind of act as when one unit got driven off, another unit could come in. Starting with Shogun 2, you can actually have those reinforcements appear instantly. So you could have 30, 40 units on the field at once. As you can imagine, when you have to click on every single unit and give each unit orders after the initial setup, things could become very, very messy very, very, very quickly, and devolves the game into even more of a click fest. So that's not necessarily bad. I mean, I know I'm probably sounding pretty negative here. I'm not saying the game doesn't handle battles well. I think if you're more interested in real-time strategy games, this is probably something you're used to and wouldn't necessarily be any kind of knock against the game. But if you're interested in more of a wargaming approach, something more authentic and more real feeling, then that may be something you consider as a negative. And I'm probably more of the latter. Although I certainly do enjoy certain real-time strategy games. Played a lot of Wargame Air Land Battle, but that's nothing here or there. Battles are really not changed all that much, although like we did mention, they did include naval battles, which is a big addition, and then land battles are pretty much the same as they used to be. One last thing worth mentioning is the objective system. Now when a battle is fought, there's an objective point that comes up on the screen, and if you lose that objective point, if you're the defender, you can just kind of plop down on it and defend it. If you're the attacker, you want to seize these objective points. Sometimes it seems the AI doesn't defend these points all that well, although certain patches have improved that. But it just seems a little bit artificial. It doesn't seem these objective points get put on an important hill or put on an important point. They seem to work better in city battles, but they don't seem to work all that well in just random campaign battles in open fields. It doesn't seem that they're given any real reason for picking that point, and it seems that battles are just being fought out over these points on a map which really have no significant bearing. It's not like a historical battle where maybe it was placed on a ridge for a reason. That ridge may have commanded the surrounding territories. These objective points don't seem to do that at all. And while it does give the game maybe more of a real feel in trying to fight and defend a fixed position for whatever reason, there seems to be no reason behind having that specific point as your objective. So while they work well in city battles, it doesn't seem to work all that well in open field engagements. It's a good idea. I think it needs a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of improvement. If they start putting those on hills or natural defensive locations, I think it'll make the game a lot better. Overall, in Rome Total War 2, the battles aren't all that changed, as I've already said. The addition of naval battles and objective points are worth noting, but other than that, it's pretty much the same. The AI needs some work. The enemy AI really seems to devolve into clone fighting, and you can really run them over pretty easily. But that goes more into my next topic, the artificial intelligence. Also, you're probably saying, while I'm criticizing the AI, you saw me just a minute or two ago get my fleet absolutely annihilated by them. In my defense, that was actually the first naval battle I had fought out. I recorded the first one. I had another one that I fought pretty well in that didn't get recorded. So I'm sure I'll get some comments on that, but just giving you that information. Also, one last thing I did really want to mention, and it's another nice addition in the gameplay elements in the battlefield. There is a new cinematic mode that you can click on where you can kind of zoom in and see kind of like you're a soldier on the ground in that unit, and it's a really nice feature. Kind of goes to the pretty aspect of the game and the really well done aspect of the visuals. One thing I'd like them to change is allow you to make commands from that on the field view. I guess the closest thing I can compare it to would be like Scourge of War's Headquarter in the Saddle type mode, where you play with your camera strapped to your character on his horse. And that's very similar to this cinematic mode here you see here, but it would really be awesome if they allowed you to make orders and changes from there. That would be a huge step forward if they did do that. But it's a nice inclusion either way. So just one last thing I wanted to mention. And now, getting into the AI. The AI in Rome Total War 2 does not fare much better than previous iterations of the Total War series. If anything, it might be slightly worse this time around, given the addition of naval battles, adding yet another area where the battlefield tactics can be demonstrated as a glaring weakness for the AI. The AI is weakest in battles. Its management of engagements both on land and sea seems somewhat puzzling at times. It'll divide its forces for no real reason and no real tactical purpose, and it doesn't seem to grasp the concepts of feints or flanking all that much. It will try and flank you at times, but it doesn't seem to be well thought out. In general, the AI either seems to swarm you or sit back and let you do whatever you want to do. It seems to be, once again, more drone armies with which you're fighting against. Another area where the AI was very weak, at launch at least, is on the campaign map. In previous versions of the Total War series, the AI seems to be fairly aggressive and certainly willing to go to war with you, especially if you begin to become a threat. In this version of Total War, however, the AI seemed to be incredibly passive. I had played a campaign of over 120 years, 120 turns, and during that period the AI had not attacked me once. If I ever wanted to go to war, I had to initiate war. If you want an easy game, that's not necessarily a problem, but if you want something dynamic that keeps you on your toes and grows with difficulty as the game goes on and as you become stronger, actually poses a threat at times, it's certainly not this game. Now, that is one thing they have been working on patching. One issue the game had, one of the bugs it had at launch, was the AI tended to send very small armies, lots of very small armies after you, basically suicide squads. That's something that was addressed, but I haven't seen the AI get a whole lot more aggressive. So while maybe their building and management of their armies is better, where the AI originally was having a lot of issues in unit selection when it built its armies. So I saw a 4,000 man army when I started playing that was all slingers, all range troops. That's definitely something that's been improved, but it doesn't seem like the artificial intelligence has gotten any more aggressive. You might get war declared on you every now and then, but it's still once in a blue moon, and certainly is something that needs to be worked on. Creative Assembly is patching this game, as I've already said, at least once. Typically about once a week, so hopefully that's one of those things that they improve on, although I won't hold my breath about the Battlefield AI, because that's been a problem with the Total War series since its inception. But with that said, not a whole lot changing with AI other than perhaps the weaker strategic play. I haven't seen as many issues of it abandoning the victory point locations since the more recent patches. So while it was certainly very, very weak at launch, it's definitely been getting a little bit better at the very least with some of these patches, although in terms of battlefield management and aggression, there definitely still are some weak spots. Moving on to graphics. The graphics in Rome Total War 2 are, as usual with previous Total War versions, more or less exceptional. If you download the most recent patch, that is. There were some interesting and silly looking bugs out there where some of the graphics were actually pretty poor at launch. Most of those seem to be resolved at this point. Not trying to gloss over the issues that the game had at launch, but it seems like those have been ironed out pretty well. The game's definitely a AAA title in terms of graphics. It's on par with anything else that you're going to see out there. Definitely a very nice looking game. I don't really have a whole lot to say about the graphics other than, as usual, Total War and the Total War series and Creative Assembly have done a very good job in making this a very pretty looking game and a very enjoyable game to play, both on the campaign screens and in the battle screens. You should not be disappointed. It also seems to run pretty well on most graphics cards. I've got a GTX 550 Ti, which is a mid-range card of about a year and a half, 2 years ago or so, and it runs the game pretty much always above. It's not at the 60 frames per second, but if I'm running it on ultra or very high settings, it tends to run still 30 plus, so it doesn't seem to be too taxing despite looking very pretty. And if you've got a lower end card, you can certainly still play the game just by turning the settings down a little bit. There's a lot of options in graphics settings, so not a whole lot to say here about graphics other than, as usual, they're pretty great. While the heart of the Total War series always seems to be their campaigns, there are a few other elements to the game which do bear mentioning. The first being the historical battles. It's another feature that they include in pretty much every single release. In this, there are several different battles, including the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. If you don't have enough time to play the campaign game, they're definitely worth taking a look. They also seem to have a little bit better performance out of the AI, probably because there's some more scripting involved in it. And there are some nice battles to play, so there's that element. Probably the biggest area where the Creative Assembly is trying to add new features and maybe improve the game seems to be multiplayer. As usual, you can play multiplayer games versus other human opponents, and you can play single battles. You can play battles where you build your own armies against other human opponents, and there also are quick battles which have a ladder series, a ladder element built into it where you can rank, move up in the rankings. So there's sort of that e-sport element, which seems to be becoming more and more popular every year. That's definitely probably the most popular method of playing online multiplayer, at least in previous versions of the Total War series, and I would imagine that'll remain the same here. If you want a real challenge from a battle, that's probably the way to play another human opponent. One new feature is the co-op campaign, if you will, where other human players can play online against other human players in a campaign. This element, I would say, is probably the most exciting and the most challenging element to a campaign. So that's a really encouraging thing, because things like diplomacy, which really don't seem to have much of a role in the strategic campaign against the AI, really matter a lot more when you're playing against a human opponent. There really is sort of a sense where diplomacy might be able to accomplish something, and where there is just sort of backstabbing that goes on and different things which you really wouldn't be able to get out of a computer opponent, which you can get out of a human opponent. Probably the most difficult element to the online human campaign is the length. I don't imagine there are going to be many people which are going to sit down and play a campaign all the way through for 20 plus hours without dropping several people in the process. So that element seems to be a little bit assumedly weak, but the idea of a human campaign at all is a huge improvement and a nice new feature which I don't believe any of the previous Total War series have had, and definitely something which kind of takes the game to a new element, a new level, and I found very enjoyable and very encouraging as well. Alright, so we've come to the conclusion of this review, and what's my take? Well, first of all, there was one more thing I needed to mention that I forgot earlier. One glaring weakness in this game is the speed at which battles resolve themselves. In the past, you used to have a risk of a battle lasting 15 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes, or maybe 20 minutes. In this game, it seems like every single battle is resolved within the first 5 minutes. I mean, you literally see armies of 4,000 men on the field, all killed in 4 or 5 minutes. And that's a glaring weakness in this game, and it makes battles almost cartoony. And that's very disappointing. and hopefully something that gets resolved in these weekly patches, because it's ridiculous to have 2,000 casualties on the field, an army in flight, and no time to plan your strategy. And as I said, you know, with the games already as clickfesty as they can be, that only makes things worse. But otherwise, I guess, well, I guess I'd put it this way. If you're a huge Total War fan, I would go out and get it now. It's a nice addition to the series. The multiplayer features are some pretty big additions, so if you're someone who's been into that multiplayer scene, there's a lot for you in the game. If you're someone who's an occasional Total War fan, you might want to wait a little bit on it. I think one thing that really always makes the Total War series special is the modding community which comes up around it. I know the original Rome Total War I was never a huge fan of, the three houses and all of that. It wasn't the greatest game. But when those realism mods started coming out, they added a whole new level, and I think the same thing can be said about the medieval games as well. So what I would say at this point is, with this game, if you're a big Total War series fan, go get it, especially if you like online play. This game has a lot of new additions in online play. But otherwise, I'd probably wait until the price starts to drop on it, and or wait until you see some mods that come out that you really, really want to play. Because the really special thing about the Total War series has really always been that strategic map that then lets you fight out your battles of your empire on a 3D battle map. That's the core of the Total War series. That's what really makes it something special. And sort of that empire management mixing with those 3D battles is really something that no other game has really been able to emulate successfully yet. And that doesn't change with this game. So, as I said, if you're a big Total War series fan, get it now. If you're not, wait till some mods come out that look really interesting to you, or wait till there's a Steam sale, wait till the price drops. It also wouldn't hurt to give the game a little bit time until Creative Assembly gets all the remaining bugs moved out of there and gets the AI improved, because the game was, for all intents and purposes, a mess upon release. It's definitely getting a lot better very quickly, but there's still a ways to go. I hope this review was somewhat helpful, and until next time, this is Matthew Flanigan for the Wargamer.com, signing out.